Look at it this way. If I'd actually let you break in, you'd be going away for a lot longer.
Hey!
Another one taken down by your friendly neighborhood Spider-Man.
It's a somewhat crazy fact that the release of Insomniac's Spider-Man 2 marks just over 40 years of video games based upon everyone's favourite friendly neighbourhood wall-crawler, with the first game being released in 1982 for the Atari Video, that would subsequently traumatise Nolan North. There have been quite a number of different Spider-Man games over the years, ranging from 2D side-scrolling beat-em-ups to the more recent open-world action games, pioneered by arguably the most famous game, 2004's Spider-Man 2 by Treyarch. Being a massive Spidey fan myself, naturally I've grown up with and played quite a few Spidey games, most of which I could say that I enjoyed, like 2005's Ultimate Spider-Man, and of course the incredible 2018 game from Insomniac, which is probably my favourite iteration of Peter Parker, alongside Andrew Garfield's portrayal. That'll probably be the most controversial take in this video.
Why'd you do that?
However, so much of what I love about both Spidey as a character and his numerous video games can be traced all the way back to the original PlayStation with Neversoft's 2000 seminal title, and its 2001 sequel by extension. And it's with this video that I want to go back and revisit what made these games so special to me as a kid, and explore the ways in which the game design and technology would go on to inform the future of Spider-Man games. So, let's take a swing across the Spider-Verse and revisit the world of Spider-Man for the PlayStation.
So get ready for a pulse-pounding, web-slinging tale of shocking revelations.
Neversoft's Spider-Man released in an interesting era, as it was both on the advent of 3D comic book games and still just before comic book movies really started to take off and licensing became a much more complicated issue. This gave developers Neversoft a certain level of creative flexibility since the game didn't have to be tied to a particular film, and ultimately Marvel just wanted a good Spider-Man game, which it most definitely was. The development for Spider-Man began in 1998, while Neversoft was still in the process of making the first Tony Hawk's Pro Skater, and felt that they should probably also have a well-known license in development too. Which is kind of funny to think that there was a time where Tony Hawk wasn't a household name.
Yo, do a kickflip! Do a kickflip!
Holy shit.
With this being the first ever fully 3D Spider-Man game, one of the biggest design challenges of working with a fast-moving character like Spider-Man was the camera, particularly during this early era of 3D gaming. Part of the reason why Neversoft took on the project of making Spider-Man is likely due to the fact that they had pretty much already solved this particular problem while developing Tony Hawk, as that camera system was designed around maintaining focus and quickly reorientating around a fast-moving skater, and as such, Spider-Man was actually developed using the same engine as Tony Hawk's Pro Skater. He's even a secret unlockable character in Pro Skater 2. And for the most part, the camera manages to stay pretty well locked onto Spidey as you play, with just a simple tap of L1 allowing you to recenter the camera.
Well, I hope they don't mind if I make a quick deposit.
Another major design challenge to overcome was of course Spidey's famous web swinging, and what struck me as interesting in the interview with project lead Chad Findlay was that they did in fact prototype a physics-based swinging system that would have required you to create pivot points on surfaces in order to swing. This ultimately was shelved because of how slow it would have been for an action game, and it just wouldn't have been fun. Tomb Raider: The Last Revelation I think shows that the tech for swinging just wasn't quite there yet.
Don't look down, don't look down.
Since the game made use of a level-based progression system instead of an open-world design, as that really wasn't feasible on the PlayStation, the web swinging was redesigned into a much simpler proximity-based system, wherein once Spidey was within a certain distance from another building, pressing the R2 button would trigger a swinging animation and then fly you there automatically. It was a simple solution that enabled the level designers to maintain the sense of speed that one associates with Spidey, and also made the outdoor levels feel a bit like platforming challenges, since you somewhat infamously couldn't reach the street level. And a lot of swings would require you to leap off of a building in order to reach the proximity required to trigger the next swings.
Anytime now, that pavement's not getting any softer. Hit this swing button, will ya?
And then to top it all off, the game utilizes a fairly straightforward but robust combat system, where Spidey can execute quick combos of punches and kicks, perform dive attacks from the air, and make use of different web-based abilities like the web yank, impact web projectiles, a web shield, and web gloves to temporarily increase damage. The game even manages to incorporate the Spidey sense, albeit in a simple fashion, triggering a screen flash in specific locations to warn you about upcoming enemies or obstacles.
I have the tingle thing, just not for bread.
There's even this really cool grab animation you could do by pressing triangle and circle, which then lets you kick an enemy away, or more hilariously, hop up on their shoulders and bash their skull in. Something that blew my mind when my brother showed me how to do it in the demo. Yeah, this was also back in that era when demo discs were a massive thing, and it's kind of funny to look back on growing up in that era because ultimately I think I spent more time playing demos of games back then than I did playing full games. Since I could only ever get a brand new game every couple of months if I was lucky, the demos were also varied too. Some demos like Crash Bandicoot 2 only contained one level and were about 5 minutes long, whereas other demos like Spyro the Dragon, Monsters Inc. and Crash Bash had a few levels and could last upwards of half an hour or longer to get through.
You gotta be kidding.
My PlayStation came with its own special demo disc that contained Crash Bash, Grind Session, Vib Ribbon, and an early PAL demo of Spider-Man, which I think the US didn't get, as the one I did find featured a different level and seemed to be from the final code of the game. This demo of Spider-Man I played over and over and over again, web swinging around the small environment and wishing I could somehow reach the next level. Replaying it as an adult for the first time, it was interesting to note a few differences, like how the load screens use alternate artwork, and the voice actress for Black Cat isn't Jennifer Hale, plus her character model seems to have slightly altered texture work.
Hey, Spider!
Hey, Black Cat, what's going on?
I know there's been some trouble, but the bank's being robbed and they've got hostages. Use your Spidey compass and get to the bank quickly.
Thanks, Cat.
Hey, Spider!
Hey, Black Cat, what's going on?
I know there's been some trouble, but the bank's being robbed, and they've got hostages. Use your Spidey compass to get to the bank quickly.
Thanks, Cat.
There was also an early preview trailer featured on a German demo disc that highlighted a few other differences, like Scorpion had a completely different texture set originally, along with a couple of prototype levels that never made it. The most interesting one being a completely different arena for the boss fight against Rhino.
Rhino Burgers coming up!
Funnily enough, I wouldn't actually play the full version of Neversoft Spider-Man until after I had played the sequel, because I only ever rented them as a kid, but I'll get to the sequel a bit later.
I can see my house from here.
It all looks really quaint now, especially when compared to the recent Insomniac titles, but playing this back in 2000 for the first time as a kid was honestly nothing short of mind-blowing. As I alluded to earlier, both of these games were a big part of the reason why I became such a fan of Spider-Man, and in many ways served as a great introduction point to the character, as the game features a number of photos from his rogue gallery, along with cameos from other Marvel characters sprinkled throughout, like Daredevil and the Punisher. The soundtracks for both games were also really good too, feeling very reminiscent of 90s animated TV shows and less cinematic like later games, utilizing pretty simple but effective loops that combined a guitar-driven rock sound with some electronic elements. For as fun and as groundbreaking as the gameplay was, what I think stood out most strongly was the presentation of Spider-Man as a character, and how well Neversoft managed to capture the essence of Spidey in quite a fast-paced and streamlined story, with some clever writing and remarkably great voice acting. A number of actors from the early 90s Spider-Man animated series reprised their roles in the game, but Spidey himself was voiced by an actor called Rino Romano, who you may recognise as the ballistics-admiring Spaniard Luis Serra in Resident Evil 4.
Oh, excuse me, Your Highness.
This would end up being pivotal for me because it just so happened that around the time Spider-Man came out on PlayStation, there was another animated series called Spider-Man Unlimited playing on TV, which Reno also provided the voice of Spidey for. You often hear from Batman fans that Kevin Conroy and Mark Hamill are the voices they hear when they read the Batman comics. And well, for me, this was the Spider-Man voice I grew to associate with the character, and still do whenever I find myself rereading Spider-Man comics. Even though I definitely have a strong nostalgic bias, I genuinely think Reno is one of the best voices Spidey has had over the years, alongside the incredible work done recently by Yuri Lowenthal.
Oops, guess we're stuck in here for a while. Want to play 20 questions? No? How about we thumb wrestle? Okay, face punch it is.
Venom's ugly face on that big screen? Now that's scary.
That's not all. Rhino's on a rampage over at Omnitech as well.
What is this, the bad guy Olympics?
Spidey wasn't just limited to talking only during the cutscenes, as he quips frequently throughout the gameplay too, making humorous and often self-deprecating observations with near-perfect comedic timing, along with trash-talking goons and even sometimes providing subtle hints on what to do next.
None of you guys can reach the ceiling, can you?
This is something that every subsequent Spider-Man game would emulate as well, with varying degrees of success depending on the actor, as the wrong voice can make Spidey really insufferable to listen to. And of course the implementation. And I think why Spidey doesn't get annoying in these games is that all of his quips are both context sensitive and level specific, meaning that you won't be hearing the same Deadpool of quips over and over again.
Ooh, are your ears ringing?
Of course, I'm not going to just sit here and endlessly gush over this game, or pretend that aspects of it haven't aged particularly well. There is a little bit of trial and error to some of the levels which can be a bit unforgiving, like the chase with Venom across the rooftops doesn't allow much room for error when it comes to your swings. The vast majority of levels in the game completely lack checkpoints too, which, is never fun, especially when you die right near the end of a level. It's not a complete deal breaker though, as most of the levels in the game are fairly short. I think for me, the real issue I found with replaying Neversoft's Spider-Man is the pacing of the campaign. Even though the gameplay itself is usually fairly fast paced, there are sections of it that just really drag and go on for way too long. If you've played the game yourself, I think we can all agree that the multiple levels of chasing Venom through the sewers got a little bit tiresome, particularly the Venom maze level where you have to slowly crawl throughout a non-linear environment and backtrack to find the exit, without a checkpoint no less. As did the fact that the majority of the enemies you fight throughout the game are these lizards and the symbiotes, although honestly I actually wouldn't bother fighting the symbiotes as I found it much easier to just ignore them and focus on getting to the next objective.
Unless they get their tickets punched by their friendly neighborhood Spider-Man.
Also, probably about 2/3 of the game take place solely in these kinds of interior locations like the sewers, the Daily Bugle, the sewers again, and the end laboratory levels, while most of the outdoor levels are featured early in the campaign, like this really long set piece where a police helicopter chases after you and is broken up over multiple levels, similar to the Venom chase sequence. This is kind of understandable though, given the hardware Neversoft were working with back then, and also this was the very first fully 3D Spider-Man. And there are still some great sequences, like the fight with Giant Mysterio, and the fight with Carnage was quite a clever boss fight, and the Monster Ox sequence even now is still quite an intense sequence. There's even a cheat code that you can enter that unlocks a what-if mode, which is essentially still the normal campaign, but with lots of random new scenes you can find, like Johnny Storm waiting for you in level 2, along with some hilarious alternate dialogue clips.
Michael! Polo!
Neversoft's Spider-Man proved to be a smash hit on the PlayStation, selling over 400,000 copies, enabling it to go platinum. And it was generally well received critically, and it would go on to be ported to 3 other systems, with the Nintendo 64 later that same year, along with the Dreamcast and PC ports in 2001. Now, I never actually played the N64 version myself, but from what I understand it's pretty much the same as the PS1 version, albeit without the FMV cutscenes in order to save memory, replacing them instead with these comic book-like panels that you flicked through. It's with the Dreamcast and PC versions where things got a little more interesting. Now, I also never played the Dreamcast version, but the PC version is a port of the Dreamcast release, and it was in fact the PC version that I first ever experienced the full game version of Neversoft's Spider-Man. It's the same game as the PlayStation release at its core, and both ports were developed by Treyarch, who would go on to develop the famous Spider-Man 2. However, the presentation is given a massive boost all round over the PlayStation version, with updated FMVs, new character models, and improved texture work all throughout the game, along with a nice resolution boost. You can see the improvements immediately when you do the comparisons, as Spidey's texture work is a lot more detailed, with you now being able to see all the web patterns that traditionally cover his suit. It really does look great, which is why it's unfortunately a shame that the PC version is a bit finicky to get running now on modern systems. You have to manually cap the frame rate, as some levels will crash if they run over 30 FPS, and the game will just outright crash if you try and run it in window mode. And when I tried to use DG Voodoo to increase the resolution, the game's sound stopped working. Which, like I said, is a shame because it would be the way I'd recommend you play it. But I'll get to that part soon, because now I really want to talk about Spider-Man 2. No, not Insomniac Spider-Man 2, I'll talk about that in my end of the year video. And no, I'm not talking about the PC version of Spider-Man 2 that was a completely different game to Treyarch Spider-Man 2, despite nothing on the box indicating that it was different.
That's it, Shocker. Let it out. Vent!
Just over a year after Neversoft Spider-Man, developers Vicarious Visions, who would later go on to work on the incredible remakes of Crash Bandicoot and Tony Hawk's Pro Skater, released a direct sequel called Spider-Man 2 Enter Electro. And as I said earlier, this was actually the game I played first, after replaying the demo of the first game 100 times. I never planned to play Spider-Man 2 first, obviously, it just so happened that the rental place in my area only had Spider-Man 2. And it's the same reason I never played Resident Evil 1 until much later in my teens, because that rental store only had Resident Evil 2 and 3.
What is this?
Spider-Man 2 Enter Electro is built upon all the framework used in Neversoft's game. It uses the same game engine, but with some updated texture work, like Spidey looks more detailed, similar to the PC release. There are a couple of new web abilities, like being able to web throw enemies in different directions or right over you, which is pretty funny, but by and large it plays almost exactly the same, which was very common for sequels back then. I mean, all 3 Spyro games on PlayStation fundamentally play the same too. You could say I'm again coming from a nostalgic bias, but man, playing both of these games back to back for this video, I honestly would argue that Spider-Man 2 is the better game out of the two of them. I feel that overall, it's a lot more polished of a campaign with much better pacing and has a much richer variety of locations and scenarios than in the first game. As I mentioned, a lot of the first game took place largely within interior locations that stretched over multiple levels. Whereas in Spider-Man 2, you go from quickly patrolling the city streets and rooftops to fighting against Shocker in a burning down warehouse. Then you're taking out bandits and stealth across an airfield before you then have to try and stop a plane from crashing inside the hangar. Then you're trekking across a rail yard rerouting power systems and then chasing after an escaping train while the Sandman is trying to pummel you. And then you're in the middle of a hostage situation beating up Hammerhead's mafia wannabes, before you go to break into a research facility to fight the Lizard, who was originally supposed to be a boss in the first game at the end of the really long sewer section.
Why couldn't the doc experiment with bunny DNA? Had to be a lizard.
The game never spends too long on one particular level theme, which for me at least I think helps make the game feel consistently engaging and exciting. Spider-Man 2 also features a number of different levels that are actually on the streets, allowing you to explore around a small hub as you search for designated goons to defeat, with the second level in particular having some cool set pieces like putting out the fire of a destroyed cafe, along with an ambush in an alleyway. It was just the very first glimpse of what we would eventually get 3 years later when Treyarch's Spider-Man 2 would revolutionize the superhero genre by moving Spidey into an open world. Not every level is great, of course. There's a couple of irritating ones near the end of the game, like one inside the research facility that had a number of different puzzles to solve without any checkpoints. And this outdoor laser turret level took a little bit of trial and error to get through, but overall I think there are less low points in Spider-Man 2 than compared to the first game.
Come out to the coast. Have a few laughs.
Come out to the coast. We'll get together. Have a few laughs.
All of the boss fights too I think are a bit of a step up from the first game, with them not necessarily being more challenging, but just requiring more interesting solutions in order to beat them. Like, Hammerhead requires you to yank his gun off him first, otherwise he'll block all of your attacks. The Sandman requires you to first build up water pressure with a switch, and then strategically lure him in front of water valves to stun him. And then the Lizard, you first have to make a vaccine and then apply it to your web attacks in order to stun him. And the final fight with Electro is similar to the Rhino from the first game, with you having to lure him into attacking generators around the map. It is interesting to note that this final fight was altered in the final release, as Originally it was going to take place atop the Twin Towers in New York, but then after 9/11 the game was delayed slightly to make alterations to the design and the textures, as you can see here.
Bingo! Good thing I've been trained for this. Hey, you get it? Trained for this? Okay, let's move on, shall we?
And then to top it all off, Spider-Man 2 had a great sense of replay value thanks to a cool new feature called Create a Spider. Now, the first game had a small handful of unlockable costumes, like the symbiote and his Spidey Unlimited outfit, whereas Spider-Man 2 had close to 30 different costumes you could unlock, and some of these costumes had special abilities too, like a stealth cloak, the ability to super jump, longer web swinging, and invulnerability to name a few. With the Create a Spider mode, you could take any of these costumes you wanted and then add 3 special abilities from any costume of your choosing, which just made replaying the game a hell of a lot of fun. This feature would more or less be reincorporated into Insomniac's Spider-Man as well, which is another reason why I've replayed that game so many damn times.
Another laser grid? Where's the trust, people? I mean, really?
The only real detracting factor of Spider-Man 2 that I could think of is that to a certain extent the story isn't quite as memorable as the first game, and I think that's mostly because that first game had Carnage and Venom and Doc Ock. I'm not afraid to admit that Electro was probably one of the lamer villains in Spidey's rogue gallery, and I still have no idea all these years later who the Beetle is, but hey. I feel that this minor gripe is kinda mitigated if you play both games back to back, and you honestly should, since combined you're only looking at about 10 to 12 hours to play through both.
What, no more?
It's fascinating to look back on these two extremely pivotal Spider-Man games some 20 odd years later, especially alongside the release of Insomniac's Spider-Man 2. Treyarch's first Spider-Man game on PS2 would pretty much exactly emulate the game design template of these two games, albeit with one of the greatest tutorial levels ever created in any game ever because it was narrated by Bruce Campbell.
Web swing over to your next objective. Use your compass and height meter to find it. If you can't find it, I can't help you. Unplug the machine and walk away.
Their next game, Spider-Man 2, would, as previously mentioned, go on to revolutionize superhero games, and pretty much since then Spidey has existed within the parameters of open world design, with 2010's Shattered Dimension making a brief return to a more linear-based level approach. Aspects of their core game design have dated somewhat, but there is still a lot of evident love for the character, and an incredibly viable charm to them that I think still shines through in both of these games today. Now, I suspect that not everyone watching is lucky enough like me to actually own physical copies of both these games, and also a working PlayStation 2. So if you do want to check out these games or replay them for yourselves, I would highly recommend checking out the Duck Station emulator. It offers a lot of quality of life improvements over the now defunct EPSXE emulator, as I found out when trying to record with it, and the audio sounded like shit. It offers high resolution support, along with things like geometry-based texture correction for when you maximize or stretch the image on some of these old games. It also supports modern PlayStation controllers, and even has a really neat library function for easy access to all your ROMs, that I'm sure you can find on your own. I'm not telling you how to pirate.
Sorry, boys and girls, but I don't think I'm gonna let you arrest me today.
And with that all said, I hope you've enjoyed my retrospective piece on the PlayStation 1 Spider-Man games. This video took a little bit longer to write and create than I expected, purely because these two games hold such a special place in my heart, and hopefully I've done them justice. A quick shout out to all the new subscribers I've gained over the last few months. I'm very close to 1k subs now, which is crazy, and I can't thank you all enough. I also have a Patreon too that you can support me on, but there's no pressure. Anyway, until next time, stay safe out there everyone. Remember, the tingle thing doesn't work for bread, and I'll see you all in the next video.